Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'm going to be repotting my Dawn Redwood tree. This tree started off as a little tiny seedling, and over the last year it grew into quite a large tree. I'll show you a quick recap of the last 2 years of this tree. Let's go back in time to February of this year, and I'll show you what this looked like way back then. Tree number 2 is my Dawn Redwood tree. And you can see it's just starting to burst out with green buds. I'll show you a close-up of that. So here is a look at the activity on the tree. You can see the buds are just starting to pop out. So there, I've got it bare rooted now. So here is a look at my root system. So you can see it has one big taproot that goes down, and off of that taproot is a lot of roots. So with a tree like this, my first step is to reduce the taproot, and I generally go in about half. So I'm going to prune it off right here. So here I go. Big little cut. Oh, there's some leaves in here. And then I'm just going to trim these roots back in size a bit. Like that. And that will be it. That's about all the root pruning I would do on a young seedling like this at this stage. And my Dawn Redwood is all ready to grow for the summer. Here is a look at the tree today. So it's gone from that little tiny seedling into a fairly large tree. Big cut coming up. And I'm going to cut it square. Here I go. Just like that. I can count how old this tree is from the rings. So it's 1, 2, 3 years old from seed. Here is a look at the tree today. So you can see I did that big chop on the top, and I've got buds all over the trunk. And some of the branches, you can see there's buds at the tip, there's some back here, and there's some back further. Some of the foliage, like this one, doesn't have any buds on it, so that can just be probably picked off. I don't think it'll grow. I don't see any buds at the tip or anywhere, so I'll prune that off. I have plenty of branches that will pop out this year. It'll just be a big fuzzy glob of a tree, and then these ones up top will shoot straight up. These trees grow very vertical. And so my goal for this tree is to keep it as small as possible and try and get all the characteristics of a mature Dawn Redwood tree. And that means, you know, a highly tapered trunk with lots of live veins going up it, lots of, you know, a fluted trunk. And a lot of that will be created through the root base, keeping a nice radial root system that'll feed those live veins going up to the top of the tree. It's quite easy to grow a Dawn Redwood into quite a large bonsai, but to keep it small might be quite a challenge. So I'm going into year 3 for this tree. So it'll be exciting to see how it develops this year. So I'm going to repot it today and give it a good root pruning and then start it again to grow for the season. Now last year I kept it in this small pot hoping it would stay small, but it didn't. I had a tray of water under it, and you can see the massive roots on the bottom of the pot here. I'll show you that. Yeah, it's just covered in roots. So yeah, I don't know if keeping it in a small pot will keep the tree small. They just seem to grow, especially if you have that tray of water under them. If I had kept it, you know, just on the bench and watered it as all my other trees, maybe it would have stayed smaller. I didn't prune it at all last summer. I just let it grow for the entire year. So it's possible I could do some pruning this summer, kind of keeping the growth under control. But I do want, you know, those roots to radiate out, thicken up, and create nice taper in the tree. So big goals for a small tree, but I'm sure It's a fairly new species for me, so I'm sure I'll learn all the techniques to create this tree over the next kind of 5 years. I'm going to start by getting the tree out of the pot. So I'll have to prune away these roots on the bottom because it will not come out of the pot with all these roots growing through the drainage holes. So when I planted this, it was just a little seedling, and this pot seemed to be the right size for the tree. But it quickly outgrew the pot in just 1 year. So I have to think what size pot I'm going to put it in. This pot doesn't really have a drainage hole, it just has little ones. Okay, I'll see if that comes out now. So here I go. Let's see if it comes out of the pot. This is just a plastic pot, that sort of a training pot that looks like a bonsai pot. Oh, I think I just broke the bottom of the pot. There, it is out. Yeah, that pot had kind of a mesh in the bottom and all the roots were through the mesh. It's one disadvantage with these pots with built-in mesh is that once the roots grow through the mesh, it's pretty tough to get them out. So here is a look at the root system. Wow, that's a lot of roots in 1 year. So I will begin combing, raking out the roots, trying to get them sorted out. I've got my root rake and my root hook, so I will begin combing out the roots. So I just want to keep my radial roots, and all the other roots can get pruned away because I want to develop that nice buttressed root base, which I'm sure will come quite quickly. The way these trees grow, they're sure fast growing trees. So I protected this tree in the greenhouse here over the winter. These trees they're hardy when they're in the ground here, but in a pot, I don't think they would survive the winter temperatures we get. I wouldn't take them much below about -10, maybe -15 degrees Celsius. Yeah, they're not in the ground. There's lots of them planted as city trees around here. They're not super hardy. And these trees were discovered, they thought they were extinct, but they were discovered in China, I think in the 1930s. So they were a rare tree back then, and now they've been propagated and they're a very common tree. You can pretty well buy them at any nursery. And if you plant them in your yard, make sure you have a lot of room for the tree to grow, because they're fast growers. They grow tall and mighty in a very short period of time. So I'm going to come in with the root rake here, or with the root hook, and just start to untangle some of these roots. So my goal is to create, as I said, a radial root system, but I also want it balanced, so balanced and flowing. So a lot of these thicker roots will have to get cut back, trying to equalize the vigor in the radial root system, which is very important when the tree is young, because all these small roots develop into your mature surface roots, and you want them looking good. Yeah, there's a lot of roots on the bottom here. They're just packed in. All these roots on the bottom will be cut away anyway, so I'm being a little ruthless with them. I may have to just cut that mat of roots away. I've got my saw here. kind of a bit of a coarse saw, but I think it'll work. So let me try cutting off these bottom roots. Feels like I'm cutting through some quite thick roots. Yeah. Okay, so that's got that thick mat of roots pruned away. Put the saw away now. And now I can continue combing out these surface roots. So I can already see the imbalance of roots. You can see a great big thick one there. Some fine roots, some medium-sized ones. And these Dawn Redwoods, they'll grow from cuttings. So even if I were to cut 90% of the root system away, the chances are the tree would survive just fine. The roots look good and healthy on the tree too. So now I can start combing underneath, removing all the old soil. So today we are above freezing once again. There's a thick root I was cutting through with the saw. So I think this is the second root pruning on this tree. I'm not sure if maybe the third. Maybe when it was a very young seedling I may have done a little bit of root pruning on it, but it was very small if I did. Okay, it looks like I've got the soil removed from the root system. So next I want to wash the root system. So when I prune it, I'm not cutting through soil with my tools, and I can clearly see what roots I have. So I will wash the root system next. All right, here I go washing the root system. I don't have my pail of water because everything's frozen outside, so I have to use the watering can. That does a fairly good job. And now I can do a little bit more combing. So next, I've got to determine where my root plane is. I've got roots down low, I've got some higher, so I've got to determine what to prune off. You know, if I keep the upper root system and prune the lower one away, or if I keep the lower one and prune the upper root system away. So I've just got to look at the tree and see where the best roots are. So you can see naturally the base of the tree is down here. However, it may not have a very good radial root system down there. It definitely has some buttressing. Well, I'm going to begin. This root is way too large and it's not very radial. If you look at it, the radial direction is here, and it's cranked over a bit. It's not too bad, but it is cranked over. I think I'd better get rid of that thick root. So I will come in with my knob cutters and I'm going to remove it totally because I have a better root underneath. So here I go, removing that root like that. So there's a thick one off. I have have to be very careful I don't damage these buds up here. So the root underneath, you can see it's more radial. It's a better root. I have a root here. It starts off radial and then it kind of curves around a bit, so I'm going to prune off the part of it that curves around, so shortening it, taking that one off. I have a root here that's hit the bottom of the pot and it goes kind of a funny direction. In fact, I'm going to shorten it quite a bit. So that one's coming off. So I think I've got a lot of roots on the surface here. I think this should be my root base, because if I go down lower, I've got kind of a Y-shaped root system. So I think I'm better to develop these upper surface roots as my root base. So I have a thick root here, and again I have a better root below, so I'm going to take that one off also. That one's gone. There's one here. It starts out radial and then goes up a bit, so I'm going to prune it off short. Always eliminating your worst roots. This one is getting very thick and I've got to prune it back to get some ramification, taper in the root, so it's getting cut back to here. Taking that off. There's a root growing straight up here I can remove. Now, some of these ones on the bottom can be reduced back. So that thick one there, I think both of these thick ones where it divides into a Y can be pruned back very, very hard. So here I go. Taking that one off. This one can come off. And this thick one here. I think two about here. Like that, and then I can clean up these cuts to make it a little flatter on the bottom. Like that. I've got a root here that's, if this is my flat bottom, I'm going to prune it off. So now the tree kind of sits a little flatter. There's one here that could be pruned back. It's getting quite thick. And then I've kind of got two levels of roots here. This plain and this one's a little higher. So I can prune away this thicker one. Like that, an upper one. That one's good and radial. This one can be pruned back. This one's a little too horizontal. I'm going to take it off. I want the roots to flow down into the soil. This one is kind of going a strange direction. So I'll prune off that part of it that curves like that. Now, I've already pruned this thicker one back. I'm wondering if I should go back a little further. Maybe a little further. Like that. And that's getting pretty good. Just
taking some moss off the trunk. I have another high one here that could maybe come off. I've got some roots below it, so that one can come off. I think that's about all I can do to the root system for this year. Quite a hard pruning on it, but I think that's progress. It's definitely going in the right direction. It's getting the start of a nice radial root system, some good buttressing. Still a little high here. Now, I've never sealed my roots with cut paste at all, and I'm wondering if I should on this tree. I should put a bit of rubber cement on the bottom. Let's try it. I don't think it'll hurt. So here I go. I'll seal these cuts up. Before I plant the tree, I'm going to do a little bit of pruning to the branches, shortening them as much as I can. So there's a good bud on the bottom here, so I can shorten that branch back. This one, I've got some buds back here, so I can shorten it. This one, I've got some buds here, so I can shorten it. And this one I can shorten. And this one, as I said, there's no buds on it at all. So it can just come right off. Like that. So now the tree is ready to be planted. And I've got to think about what size pot. Do I put it in a big pot, a small pot, a round pot, a rectangular pot? I think whatever pot I put it in, the roots will fill the pot again. So I think I'll put it in a larger pot, but not too much larger. So I do have this pot here, which is fairly large, a lot of volume of soil in there, but I think it'll be good for the tree. I think it's a good, second step from that small pot to this one. So that's the pot I'll use. It's a plastic pot again. So I'll get some drainage screens in, a base layer of soil, and then plant the tree. Okay, in go the Chris Marshall drainage screens, sent all the way from Ireland. So those are in. So now I can add a base layer of soil to the pot. And I'll be planting the tree central in the pot. This is just in the early training stages, so the roots will have equal room on all sides to grow. So there's a mound of soil, and I can then position the tree. So the front of the tree, the root base is pretty good here, and I have a bud on the apex that comes out the front. So I think I'll pick that as the front of the tree. And I want to make sure all the roots are in the soil and combed out. As radial as I can get them. Like that. And I'll just check the height in the pot. It's a little high, so I will rotate it down a bit to about there. Make sure the tree's vertical. It's planted centrally. All is looking good. I'll just check the roots one more time. That's all looking good. And now I can fill it in with soil. So here I go. And because the roots are flat and radial, there won't be much of an airspace in the soil. It'll surround the root system quite well. Lots of soil in the pot. And as always, I just lift the tree a bit as I'm working the soil in to make sure the roots are flowing downwards a bit into the soil so they're not purely horizontal. Otherwise, you can never raise your tree in the pot. You want those roots to flow down into the soil. So over the years, as the roots mature, you can lift the tree and show off that root base. If they're horizontal, you can't lift the tree up or all the roots are out of the soil. So I'm very excited to develop this tree over the years and see if I can get, that beautiful trunk you see on mature Dawn Redwoods and keep the tree fairly miniature. I have no set height for the tree, but I'm going to try and keep it on the small side if possible, because I don't want, a giant Dawn Redwood tree as a bonsai if I can keep it small. That's the challenge. And that's the challenge of a lot of bonsai, is to get all the characteristics of a mature tree in something that's quite small and tiny. Okay. Time to water the tree. So none of the roots were active yet. They were all just dormant, but the buds were certainly starting to pop on the trunk, so the tree was becoming active, so it's a good time to repot it. And these roots will quickly fill the pot, and by the time the tree goes outside in spring, it'll be firmly, quite solid in the pot. It won't blow over in the wind or anything. Here's a look at the old pot it came out of versus the new pot. So it's about a third larger in all dimensions. So it should do quite well this year. Again, I'll keep the tray of water underneath it so it's always watered and fertilized well. They like nice moist soil, these redwoods. Yeah, so it should be an exciting year to see how this tree develops. Here is a look at the tree now, so you can see all the buds on the trunk. I'll rotate it around. So there'll be a lot of work coming up. Once these buds start elongating, I'll do some branch selection, kind of thinning out some of these clumps. I'll grow a leader, and yeah, I'm keeping all the lower branches on to thicken the lower part of the trunk. And if I remove them in the future, you get these live veins that grow around where the branches were, and it creates a really interesting trunk. It's one of the features of these Dawn Redwoods is they get a really cool, interesting trunk on them. Yeah, so it'll be exciting to develop this over the next year. When I'm repotting trees, I always try and tackle the trees that need repotting the most. So you could see this one was very, very root bound. It desperately needed repotting and root pruning. And then the trees that, there's some trees that could use repotting, but they can make it through another year. So I leave those to the end. So if I run out of time in the repotting season, I've got all the trees that really need it done, and the ones that are kind of borderline, I can leave at least for another year. The Dawn Redwood is one of my favorite trees, mainly because of that really interesting vascular trunk they get. They are a deciduous conifer, so in spring, these buds turn into these nice bright green feathery leaves, and then they darken over the summer, and then in fall they turn this kind of reddish, rusty color and fall off for the winter. So a really interesting tree species to watch through the seasons. So it'll be interesting if I can keep this small and miniature looking and develop it into kind of a miniature Dawn Redwood tree. So that's it for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.